No interest. Is this your son?
Miriam. Okay, so welcome. So for the start, please create an account in the lms.infosite.net. So facilitate for you to do the post-training short quiz later on, and also there are 2 review forms for you to complete. And later I will show where you can access the question set for you to study for your written exam. Okay. So do me a favor, create your account first now while waiting. So I will just give another 2 minutes for other people to join in. Okay.
Sorry, Daniel.
Yes.
Is the feedback form the one that you sent earlier today?
That is from Huawei. We have another one in my Google Sheet. So you
In your Google Sheets?
Yes, you need to fill up both. Okay, so
Okay.
this is my Google Sheet. So when you scroll down, there are 2. One is from my company. There's a Google form there. The other one is the Huawei link that you received from email, if not mistaken.
Oh, okay.
So I also put into the sheet in case some of them did not receive the email. Okay? So you need to complete these 2 forms also. Then later I will show you where to access the post test and the sample question for you to study. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so enough for the wait. There are a lot of you here already. So welcome and good afternoon to you guys to attend the last days of the training. So I will cover one more topic, okay, and some of the lab demo from the equipment lab. Okay, so there are one more topic that does not really have time to cover anymore. That is on the container-wise. Okay, so let's start this topic number 5. Introduction to the virtualization features. So for this topic, we'll focus in the virtual machine and the resources that they use, and also some of the functionality that we actually did it in the lab demo yesterday. So here we will understand the theory part of it, how the platform actually provide your virtual machine to, connect from one node to another and things like this. The objective here, we'll look into more in-depth in the virtualization features, and then where and when virtualization features may be used. So you have more understanding from the theory point of view here. Okay, so you can try to relate on the things that we did yesterday on the demo part. on the feature set. So as you can see here, what do I get by using virtualization? So when your physical machine convert to a VM, your VM will give you a lot of extra benefit that earlier when you run the entire instance on one single hardware, that cannot give you all this functionality. Okay, so let's look into it. First thing, introduction to cluster feature. Okay, so this is the virtual cluster concept. Okay, virtual cluster concept. So try to relate it with a Huawei solution. So initially, this is actually your we can call it the management cluster in your Fusion Compute solution. Okay. So this is actually your Fusion Compute. Okay, Fusion Compute. So all this is your CNA node. Okay, CNA node. So I'll be using this like the IP sense storage, although we have only one set. That I actually showed yesterday how you can connect to the storage system using IPsend, for example. Okay. So this is generally your physical switch, okay, to interconnect all these nodes together. So now, yesterday I also demoed the hosts running on the same virtual cluster. They will give you a lot of benefit. Okay, so over here you will see that from your particular host, okay, this layer, okay, can be the DVS, for example, okay, the distributed virtual switch. Now, when you're running on the same cluster, the DVS can actually be accessed by multiple CNA nodes. Okay, so this is another functionality provided on the network perspective, so that your virtual machine can communicate with each other, although they are running on a different CNA host. Okay. So now, when you have a virtual cluster, you see that over here, if one of the CNA node is down, okay, your virtual machine here is basically running like a, okay, these are basically running similar like an application, for example. Okay, although they come with their own operating system and application inside. So when one CNA host is down, this happens in one same management cluster, your virtual machine can actually move to run from one CNA to the other CNA. Okay. Now, if you have this scenario, this is unplanned downtime on CNA. Okay. So your VM will go down also. Okay. So remember that when your CNA node is down, your VM will also go down at the same time. Okay, because they are running on that particular host, and for any reason, maybe hardware failure whatsoever, the CNA node now uncontactable. The entire hardware is down. Your virtual machine running on it will also be down. Now, if your CNA node is part of this virtual cluster, you can configure further functionality that we'll discuss later, what we call the virtual machine high availability. Okay. Virtual machine high availability that we'll discuss later, HA, to tell the VRM, oh, these two virtual machines, I would like to move them to the other CNA node if there are any downtime incurred. Okay, so if the CNA node is down, basically, for example, so the VRM will actually help you to repower on the virtual machine on the other CNA host. Okay, so remember this particular concept, we will incur some short downtime on the virtual machine. Okay, but they will generally resume to service because they will repower on themselves on the other working CNA node. So this particular feature is offered if the CNA node is sharing in one particular cluster to minimize your virtual machine downtime. So you will see that here, HA is actually stands for high availability. Okay, high availability. So later on, we'll talk about more in depth from HA perspective, which level do we provide this particular function. Okay, so this is on the virtual machine downtime. So let me repeat. Okay, so you see that the VM is down following the CNA node. So the virtual machine will be able to power on the other CNA node, okay, so that to minimize downtime. Now, another thing here is, in order to provide this functionality, okay, still remember your virtual machine requires to run, for example, this is number 2 and number 1, okay. So your VM1 and VM2, okay, VHD and also XML, okay, VHD and also XML file need to be in the shared storage. Okay, this one we call it the shared storage. Okay, shared storage. So with the shared storage concept, now for the VM1 and the VM2 virtual machine data is in this particular data store. Okay. Now, at any one time, this particular data can be used by only one CNA host to power up your virtual machine. Okay. So in order to facilitate the HA function, so earlier this VM, okay, is running on this CNA host. So the file will be actually used by this CNA hardware. But over here, because they are sharing the same data store, the other CNA hosts also able to access to the same data set. Okay, so this is the minimum requirement if you want to facilitate the virtual machine to run on a different host, okay, without changing the storage itself. So in the event of your CNA node is down here, the virtual machine data is still accessible from the shared storage by other CNA node, then you can proceed to repower on the VM on the other CNA hardware. Okay. Now, if your virtual machine is running on the CNA local disk data store, okay, which data actually come inside this CNA hardware, if the entire hardware is down, your virtual machine will actually follow and you can't do anything about it. That is why for enterprise environment, it is best to utilize a shared storage. Okay, so yesterday we actually covered something similar. So yesterday I do some testing. Okay, so yesterday demo. Okay, I basically utilize okay, two node. Okay, CNA1 and CNA2. So both of them is actually connected to the IP SAN data store. Okay, so your Win701 and Win702 VHD and your XML is here. Okay, VHD and XML is here. So I am running the virtual machine on CNA2 earlier, and I do a host migration. Okay, this is what I did yesterday, so that your virtual machine can then power on, okay, and migrate it from CNA2 to CNA1. This is possible because they are connecting to the same storage data store, and the virtual machine actually stays here. Okay. So this is to facilitate live host migration without actually shutting down your virtual machine. Okay, so this is just to migrate from host to host, similar to HA, but this is actually triggered manually, whereby both hosts is actually online. You can move around without any issue. Okay, just that they will have slight network interruption that I actually showed you yesterday. So they are sharing the same storage in order to facilitate this feature set. Okay, so it is actually related here. Just to recap yesterday on the lab itself, okay, what we actually covered. Okay, so next thing, with this kind of clustering functionality, okay, so you see that there are 4 CNA nodes here sharing the same cluster. It's basically the same as scenario like earlier. So now, if your CNA node is in the same cluster, and now you will see that the numbers of virtual machine running on it is actually imbalanced, so that this CNA node now is actually overloaded, okay, overloaded by the virtual machine usage. Now over here, you will see that the usage is unbalanced. Okay? It is not really a good sign, whereby this server host might be using more power, and due to the resource limitation here, the virtual machine that is sharing the same hardware might also slowing down. So in order to solve this particular scenario, if the CNA node is within the same cluster, we can actually do a live migration here, okay, live migration. So you will see that the cluster will able to, okay, what they call here, okay, enable DRS. So I will show you where to actually do that. Okay. So DRS will actually check CNA, CPU, and also RAM usage. Okay. So that I will utilize the DRS to even out the load on your CNA host. So they'll try to maintain the usage percentage on all the CNA node to be stable. Okay. So later on, there are some extra options that you can set actually for you to control this. So when they detect that this CNA host is now in highly loaded environment, I will help them to do live migration. So in order to achieve this feature, your particular storage need to be also shared by multiple CNA hosts. So once the VM is migrated to the other CNA host, this particular server will actually go back to normal load. And now your loading on all your CNA node will be even out. Okay, so this is another feature in the virtual cluster to provide usage load balancing. Okay, usage load balancing. So earlier is the HA to actually protect your virtual machine time, okay, to minimize downtime itself. So next thing here will be load balancing. Now the load balancing is similar to what I did yesterday. And this one will require your, okay. So over here we are doing actually the virtual machine live migration to CNA host. Okay, CNA host. Okay, so this idea. Now, if you want to see more scenario, I will say here. Okay, so if you go for Fusion Compute live migration, okay, let me put it more detail. Virtual machine live migration. Generally, we have a few options. Okay, so we can actually do CNA host live migration. Okay, so this is to migrate from one host to another. This particular option required shared data store by CNA node to support live migration. Okay. So if the CNA node is connected to the same data store, you can migrate from one host to another, like what we see from the PPT animation. Okay, so this is one thing. So you can provide another one, CNA host and data store live migration. This is another scenario. Okay, so this one, CNA host and data store live migration, you are migrating the load from one CNA host to another and also migrating the virtual machine data from one data store to another. So this one will support CNA local virtualized data store. Okay. To another. Okay. This one I will put into maybe local or shared. To another local or shared virtualized data store. So it is quite flexible, I will say. Okay, quite flexible to do all these things. This one also virtualized data store. So remember, all these features will require virtualized VIMS data store in order to achieve this feature set. So if you actually add in the data store as non-virtualized, you cannot perform all these tasks. Okay, this is a note to you. Okay, so this is the other options where you can migrate your virtual machine from host and data store to another host and also the other data store. And there will be another options, that one, okay, data store level live migration. So this one will support, okay, local data store to another local data store. Okay, so these are the few options. Either you migrate the load from one CNA host to another. This is from the host perspective only. Okay, so this one pretty fast as the migration because you are just moving the application to run on one to another. Okay, so if you are going for the other two, as you can see here. Okay, so over here we are moving the virtual machine data and also the load from one CNA host to another CNA host and one data store to another data store. And the third one will be moving your virtual machine from one data store to another data store. So this is the concept whereby when you're doing the data store level of migration, I am actually cut and paste, okay, moving the actual virtual machine disk data from one storage to another. So this one will be a bit slower because it will depend on how huge your virtual machine disk sizing are. Okay. So if you are planning to maybe migrate or upgrade your storage system, then you can facilitate use this feature to move around your data, which earlier when you're using physical machine, it's not easy to do so. Okay, so these are the few options for the virtual machine live migration. Okay, CNA host only, CNA host and data store migration at the same time, or only migrating the data store. Okay. So the keyword here is live migration. Okay. So if you are using cold migration, the VM required to be shut down, basically, that can support any types of storage. Okay. Any types of storage. Okay, so this is the load balancing using DRS feature set. So later we'll talk about more later. Also, I will show you from the demo where can you access the DRS functionality that you might need to also set in your lab. Okay, so another functionality from the cluster. So we have the virtual machine here. Okay. So the virtual machine will be holding what kinds of resources? First will be your okay. So check. So your virtual machine will be holding XML file that will determine your vCPU number, then your VRAM, and also your vNIC, all these things, and also your VHD disk. Okay, so these are the configuration that will be sitting in your virtual machine. So I will be getting all these resources basically from the virtual cluster node. Okay, so when you add in the CNA node that I showed you earlier into the virtual cluster, your CPU resources will be combined into a total processing power frequency, how many gigahertz are there available, and total how much RAM memory do you have on the CNA host, and the data store that is used by the CNA host within the cluster. Okay, so this one will be covered for your VHD capacity. So I will be configuring my VM to define how much CPU, RAM memory, and the virtual disk capacity required. So this I showed before yesterday. Where can you actually configure that? Okay. So the virtual machine will be running on all these resources. Now, later when you require more resources, okay, because your virtual machine is getting more and more load now because businesses are getting better, I will require more resource power. Okay. So you will see that over here with the limited numbers of CNA node, I cannot actually provide a stable performance for my VM anymore because I'm running low in CPU and RAM memory, and sometimes utilization might go up to 80 to 90% on one single CNA. So it's not really a good sign, especially on performance and also your redundancy perspective. So in order to do that, because it is a virtual cluster functionality in Fusion Compute, I can always add in more nodes. Okay, so you can buy extra server hardware and then install with CNA ISO and proceed to add them into your VRM virtual cluster. Okay, so you can pack your CNA host into this cluster and also subscribe, maybe deploy another storage or create another extra LUN capacity to map to the Fusion Compute CNA host. So by adding this CNA host and the storage for data store, I can now get extra more resources to be used by this virtual cluster farm, and my virtual machine can now move around and also moving to a new CNA host. Okay, so to load balance the virtual machine workload, so with virtualization, virtual cluster technology, we can achieve easy scalable functionality. Okay, easy scalable functionality. So this is another benefit while using virtual machine and also virtual cluster. Okay. So for your CNA node, you can always add in, okay, and also remove if you want to. Okay. When you try to remove the CNA host, you just need to make sure the virtual machine is not running on that CNA host, and the virtual machine that is running is not part of any of these data store, so that you can remove them from your VRM or virtual cluster anytime. Okay, so adding in and removing is quite an easy task. You just need to fulfill certain requirements. Okay, so these are the concept for easy scalability. So you can join multiple different server if you have different generations of CPU that is parked under one virtual cluster. So we will have another feature to help you on that. Okay. So next thing, using the virtual cluster functionality. Okay. So when you have a virtual cluster created, not only to provide live migration, your redundancy protection, and easy scalability, we can also optimize the RAM memory usage. So over here, this particular slide is referring to your, okay, so over here, your hypervisor is referring to your CNA host, and this is the physical RAM memory. Okay, physical RAM memory. For example, the physical RAM memory, I have only like 4 GB. Okay, 4 GB. So how can I limit and also utilize the low numbers of RAM memory to run multiple virtual machines? So over here, you see, yesterday we do go through some of the function, and also the day earlier on the theory part, how they share your memory access. It will be based on first come, first serve basis to actually reserve the space and use it. So you will see that the data set, the one in red, do you see the one in red here? Is actually shared by 3 virtual machines here. So you will see that this particular space might be operating system data, OS data, and OS data. Okay. Now, all these virtual machine might be running Windows 7 at the same time. So when you are loading Windows 7 operating system data, there will be a lot of data which is actually identical, although they are running on different virtual machines, that actually can be shared for read purposes. If the operating system data is only for read purposes for certain platform to run, we can basically share these particular amounts of RAM memory. For example, here maybe a 2 GB, a 2 GB, and also 2 GB. Okay. So here you will see that the 2 GB is basically shared by multiple virtual machines. Okay. This is what we call memory sharing. So when you enable the functionality in the virtual cluster, this is one of the technology or feature offered inside the virtual cluster called memory sharing. So when your virtual machine is trying to utilize the physical RAM memory and they are actually doing reading to the same sets of data, so they will basically share the same space. So over here, I do not require to assign more RAM memory capacity to all these 3 VMs. So with the memory sharing, you can reduce a lot of RAM memory actual use on the physical hardware. Okay. So this is one of the feature of us called memory sharing, okay, to share the same data space on the RAM part. So other data which is unique, okay, so you will see that the color code here, green, purple, and black, these are unique data. Maybe this guy running Exchange, Outlook, for example, this is running Microsoft Office. This guy may be running other application. So if the application is not the same type, then they will hold their own unique data, which require extra space from the hypervisor physical RAM memory. So with the operating system data optimization, in a lot of enterprise environment, they might be deploying like hundreds of virtual machines that is using the same operating system version. So from there, you can save a lot of RAM memory spacing. Okay, with this memory sharing. So another options in the middle. So this is another part to actually share. Let me see here. Okay. So this is basically sharing free RAM space by multiple virtual machine. Okay, by multiple virtual machine. So when you see that over here, the utilization for VM3 is 70%, this guy 70, this guy 20. So from the 20, I am using around 400 megabyte RAM memory only. So the virtual machine basically still have like 1.6 gigabyte free RAM, okay, non-reserve. Okay, so this is keyword. So if the virtual machine did not reserve anything, this 1.6 gigabyte is basically a free space in the RAM memory. So when the virtual machine 3 and 2 require to utilize more RAM space, they will basically share this free space that might be assigned to VM1 if they are utilizing it, now used by VM2 and 3 first. So with this particular technology, if your virtual machine loading on the RAM memory is not really even, then the space itself can be shared by multiple VM. So this is a technology we call memory ballooning. Okay. So this is one of the memory function used in the virtual cluster. So you cannot choose which method to use. Please bear in mind. All these will be a combination of functions to optimize your RAM memory usage. Okay. So all these are pretty important technique because they will ask in the exam also. Okay. So memory ballooning is basically sharing the non-used RAM free space by multiple VM. So it's like a balloon that you can expand and shrink it anytime based on your usage requirement. Okay. So this ballooning will be used especially when your virtual machine RAM memory usage is not really in a stable high and low load manner. Okay, so they will be sharing the free space. So this is memory ballooning. And the next option, the third one over here. So you will see that the virtual machine, okay, is actually using VM3 as an example only. So when the RAM memory is using active, okay, so this one, let me just write down here. Okay, so when the RAM data is active, okay, then they will fully utilize all the space here. Okay, so later when they actually move on, the application might not utilize this data anymore. So certain RAM data actually inactive. Okay, so when the RAM memory data is inactive, okay, the program is now actually maybe in a sleep mode. It's not using anymore. So when the load is not there on the application, the data is still sitting on the RAM. So when the virtual machine actually detects it, okay, inside the hypervisor, they have their own threshold, okay, that you cannot define actually. The system will actually optimize that. So when they detect the threshold that the data is not using anymore in the RAM memory for any reason, they will help you to swap the data from the RAM to the data store disk. Okay, so this swap file will be in your virtual machine folder. Okay, this concept is quite similar to Windows and also Linux, that they come with internal swap file. And even from a desktop and laptop, you will also have a swap file created for you to move inactive RAM data to the disk so that you can free up your RAM memory, okay, to be used by other applications. Okay, so the inactive data will still be there, but it is on the disk level. To facilitate later, if you require to utilize the data again, then they will swap the data from the disk back to the RAM memory, and you can run it and process the data itself. Okay, so this particular swapping is happening on the hypervisor layer. So where do they swap the file? They will swap the file from the RAM memory to your virtual machine folder in your data store. Okay, so this particular technique is called the memory swapping. Okay, memory swapping. So we have three different memory optimization technique. One is called memory sharing, another one memory ballooning, and also memory swapping. All these three features is actually part of a big one called memory overcommitment. Okay, so you basically overcommit what you have on your physical server hardware, especially on the RAM memory part, to put in and run multiple virtual machines that you might not able to sustain if all of them run in 100% load. Okay? So this particular feature is to facilitate a mixture of high RAM usage VM and also some of the low RAM usage VM. Okay? So with memory overcommitment, okay, you can initially run more virtual machines in one particular CNA node cluster. Okay, so they will ask in the exam, for example, memory overcommitment, what are the three techniques used? Okay, so you need to answer memory sharing, memory ballooning, and also memory swapping. Okay, so earlier I tested without memory overcommit. Okay, I can only start 20 Windows 7 virtual machine using 2 CNA nodes. Okay. So when I enable later memory overcommit function on the virtual cluster, I can now start up to like 40 Windows 7 virtual machine using the same 2 CNA nodes. This is quite significant because in my test environment, all this virtual machine is running the same operating system. Okay? And because this is only a client VM, does not run a lot of application, the OS data is basically shared. So you will see that a huge amount of RAM memory reduction in usage after you enable memory overcommitment. Okay, so the memory overcommitment you can enable and disable online without shutting down or restart the host itself. To enable it is quite easy, but to disable the memory overcommitment, please remember after you disable, make sure your CNA host RAM memory can support your virtual machine. Okay, so if you did not enable this memory overcommitment, all these techniques will not be taken in place. Meaning to say the virtual machine will actually request the space, for example, like the memory sharing. Although they are sharing the same OS data, but they will still duplicate the data on the RAM memory. So you will require more RAM space in order to actually utilize this particular CNA host environment. Ballooning will not be there anymore. Okay. Then the swapping part, you will require to rely on the virtual machine operating system swapping internally. Okay. So the internal swapping, sometimes for some performance reason, maybe they actually disable the feature, then you generally do not have the memory swapping function inside the virtual machine. So memory overcommitment is recommended to actually enable it, but by default in your virtual cluster, it is disabled. So later I will show you where to actually enable this feature to improve the RAM memory usage. Okay. So those are certain cluster feature that we already discussed just now. Okay, so next thing we move on to some virtualization feature. Okay, first, when we look into VM feature, okay, so you can proceed something like this, whereby I will deploy my virtual machine from the single file here, okay, and then actually rename them or change attribute for all these VM so that it will be a different virtual machine but holding identical data. Okay, sounds familiar? Yesterday, I actually showed you how to do that. This is one of the feature called virtual machine template deployment. Okay, virtual machine template deployment. So virtual machine template deployment, this need to be a okay, VM template here. So this need to be a VM template. Okay. Convert from virtual machine. Okay. So you need to first prepare the VM to install OS, install application. Okay. So if it is a Windows, you need to also do sysprep. Okay, sysprep. So when you do sysprep, they will bring your machine into a new out of box status. Okay, new out of box status when you do a sysprep, so that when you later deploy the virtual machine and power it on, they will ask you what username do you want to put in all these things as a new fresh installation machine. Okay, it is required for Windows machine, especially when you are using it in the Active Directory environment. Okay, so for me yesterday I didn't do that because I'm not using any Active Directory environment. Okay, what we call the Active Directory from Microsoft. Okay, so you're required to do that. So remember, the VM template requires to be converted. Okay, so in order for you to do that, you need to pre-ready your virtual machine, and from there you can deploy multiple ones. Okay, so you have a few options here. Let me just show you that. Okay. So to create virtual machine, you have a few options. Create the VM. Okay. So this is new creation and empty without any data that I showed you yesterday. Actually, you need to perform your own operating system installation and also application. This is one option. Okay, so you need to manually install OS and also application. So the other options will be deploy from VM template. Okay, so this one I showed you also yesterday. You need to convert VM into template to be used. So your template will cover operating system and application install. Okay, so just use it as a template. Okay, like when you're doing some programming or website, you have a template, you just use it to modify, for example. Okay, so this is another option. So I also show you, for example, clone virtual machine to virtual machine. Okay, virtual machine to virtual machine. So some of you asked a question in the group yesterday or today. So I will just use the time here also to explain a little bit. So to deploy from VM, your virtual machine need to shut down before convert to template. Okay. So if you are planning to use this method, remember the golden image virtual machine, okay, need to be shut down. So you need to shut down that VM before you convert to a template. Then you can utilize the template to deploy your virtual machine. So when you clone a VM to VM, okay, virtual machine can be online VM. Okay, so this one I will say source VM that used to be cloned can be online or offline. So I am cloning an identical virtual machine. Okay, and this one when you clone a VM, all attributes will be the same. Okay, will be the same. Okay, let me just put in here. Okay, so this one will be including IP address. So normally we don't use the VM to VM cloning because I do not want to have some IP conflict issue happens. Okay? And especially when you are doing Active Directory integration, if you clone the VM like this, the domain controller will see there are two identical VM in the environment, and sure then you will have a lot of extra issue. Okay? So the VM cloning is not really recommended, although it is one of the options. If your environment is a test environment, okay, running maybe DHCP, IP whatsoever, and you are not using it in Active Directory environment, you can always think of cloning the VM directly. Okay? If not, you should go for template deployment where your VM attributes can be actually changed. Okay, so these are some of the tips for you to actually do that. Okay, so these are the few options that you can create your virtual machine. So now another thing will be import from template. Okay, import from template. So initially, this is basically a virtual machine template created and exported to external location. Okay. So you can now proceed to import the template back to your environment and then utilize the template to deploy the virtual machine. This is another option over here. Okay. So after you actually deploy your virtual machine template, you can export it out, okay, save it somewhere else, okay, as a backup. So later you can also utilize it in another Fusion Compute environment if you want to. Okay, so this is how you can actually do that. Okay, so we have all these options to create your virtual machine. Okay, so now you are more clear what is the differences between the VM deployment and the clone VM to VM. Okay, so VM deployment from template, you can change attributes. It will be another new machine. If you clone it, it will be identical one. If you use fixed IP, they will also come with the same IP. So when you're doing a cloning, if you are using virtualized data store with snapshot function, you can do that while the source virtual machine that you want to clone that is running online. Or the source VM that you wish to clone is also offline, you can actually do that too. Okay, so this is the extra notes. Okay, so when you would like to also create your template, okay, when you go for create virtual machine template, okay, either you convert VM to template, okay, convert what we call the offline VM to template. This is one option. Okay, another one, you can actually clone virtual machine, okay, on or offline VM to template. Okay, so you will see that converting the VM template will be 1-to-1. Okay, you are converting the VM to a template. So your result will be one VM template. Okay, you need to get this right on the scenario file. So another option here will be cloning the virtual machine that you plan to use as a template. Okay, being online or offline. So when you clone the VM as a template, your result will be one virtual machine and also one VM template. So you generally have two virtual machine. One is actually a running VM. Another one will be used for your template, for example. Okay, so these are the few options. So being which one that actually suits yourself. Okay, so your virtual machine template management. Okay, so if you require it to update OS and application. Okay. You need to convert the VM template back to virtual machine. Okay. Then power on VM to update OS and application. Okay. So if Windows VM need to do sysprep again, okay, before shutdown. Then later converted VM to template again. Okay. So this is how you manage your virtual machine template. So after you convert it to a template, you cannot power it on anymore or do any changes. So for example, the template is running for like a few months time or 1 year already. You found that the application and operating system is out of date. You can always convert the virtual machine template back to a normal VM state. Okay, back to a normal VM. Then you can power on the virtual machine like a normal VM. Then go to the console and update your operating system and application, so that the VM template will be a up-to-date state. Okay. After that, we can actually do a sysprep again, okay, to clear the Windows virtual machine back to the out-of-box new state, shut it down, and convert it into a template again. Okay. So this is one of the tasks need to be done by the Fusion Config Administrator, as always. Okay. And in one enterprise environment, they might come with like 10 or 20 templates, okay, that need to be managed like this. So that later on, when you deploy the VM from this template again, you do not need to do maybe Windows update for operating system or application reinstallation. Okay, so you do it one time on the template. After that, you deploy, it will be the same new version. Okay, so these are the few things that you can do and manage on the virtual machine template. Okay, so you will see that the next one will be okay, cloning. Okay, so another one here will be VM replication. Okay, VM replication. So when you're using a virtualization feature, your virtual machine can also replicate from one environment to the other. Okay? This part is not covered in HCIA syllabus. It is covered in HCIE, Cloud Computing syllabus. Okay, Cloud Computing syllabus. So over here, this will be your production data center. Okay, data center, production data center. So this is your production VM. Okay, so I would like to do replication to over here. Maybe I put in this is a data center 2, DC3, and DC4. Okay, so it's actually identical virtual machine. Okay. So this virtual machine will be in a standby state. Okay. So the VM will not be powered on because it's just a virtual machine replica from your production VM. So this is to protect, okay, in order when you have some site failure, okay, for example, power failure in this data center. If I would like to continue the service, I can always power on virtual machine replica from the other data center that comes with the same copies of your VM. Okay? So the replication part will provide one-to-one virtual machine copy. Okay? So we'll require some extra software in order to provide this feature. So if you plan to do this, okay, So you need to know the concept here is from 1 to 1 or maybe 1 to multiple site that comes with the same identical virtual machine copy, but it's all in standby. Wait until you require it, only you power on the VM. Okay? So this particular replication function, okay, so your required Huawei PC Manager replication software. Okay? Replication software. Okay, so this is one of the software required when you would like to provide the virtual machine replication. So this for your extra information for study, your syllabus will not cover up to that in depth. Okay. So BC Manager replication software to actually help you to manage the replication function. And then you also require to deploy additional what we call the virtual replication gateway or the VRG virtual machine. Okay, this is just to clear doubts. If you read any documentation or any training material that comes with the VRG, it's basically a virtual machine appliance from Huawei. Okay. So the relationship will be something like this. You have your CNA node 1, okay, in production DC, and you have the DR DC. Okay, this is for backup. So here you have your CNA 1, production 1. So over here, I am running, for example, virtual machine 1, okay, production. Then I will utilize the VRG to actually do my replication to read the virtual machine data using VRG1, okay, managed by replication to the DR VRG2, for example, then to your VM replica. Okay, VM replica. So this is the relationship in order to provide the replication function. Okay, so that the other data center will also have a set of CNA node here. Okay, maybe 11. So this is for the backup. Okay. So in order to provide replication feature, you need to have an identical virtual machine and identical CNA node in both environments in order to provide this feature set. Okay. So as a virtual machine replication, it is pretty easy. You can actually provide a lot of times, okay. For example, here you can also do replica again, and again. So I can configure a lot of virtual machine replication, okay, based on your scenario required. Because your VM is now an application, I can always replicate them from one side to another using Huawei solution over here. So it is easier to provide replication on a virtual machine level as compared to a physical machine level. Okay, so this is another feature offers in the virtualization technology, okay, that is holding on the virtual machine part. Okay, so next thing here will be okay, your virtual machine resource expansion. Okay, yesterday I do show you some of it, whereby you can now see that, oh, from the VM, the load is pretty high, maybe running low in CPU, RAM memory, and also disk space. Yesterday, I actually demoed to you how to expand the disk space on the Fusion Compute level and also expand it inside the virtual machine operating system and add in an extra network card and also delete the network card. So all this, some of the resources can be done online to the virtual machine. And if you plan to do hot add resources for CPU and RAM memory, then you need to see the operating system support. So over here for the virtual machine resource hot add. Okay, sometimes this is what we call online adding. So we have a few options here. Okay, first will be your virtual disk expansion. Okay, virtual disk capacity expansion. So this virtual disk capacity expansion can be supported by most of the operating system. Okay, similar another one, your virtual NIC, also supported by most of the operating system. Okay. So if you are doing another one, your virtual RAM memory, okay, supported by later generation server OS. Okay. So you can check your server operating system. Do they support virtual RAM memory hot add or not? Okay. So this is doing it without restart. Okay. That I actually demoed to you yesterday. So when I add in, straight away the OS can detect it. Okay. So another one will be your virtual CPU. Also need to see which particular server OS that you are actually running. So most of the latest generation operating system should be able to support this feature, like for example, Windows Server 2006 or 2019. Okay, they might support this particular function. So you need to check from the documentation of our, okay. So this is the hot add resources. So it will come with this capacity card that I showed you yesterday. So the RAM memory and the CPU, if your OS does not support hot add, no issue. You can always shut down the virtual machine, change the RAM memory and the CPU number, then repower on the VM. Then you should reflect the changes after a reboot. Okay, so this is the types of hot add resources that you can do on the virtual machine. Okay, and you can also do virtual machine console access, okay, that I showed you yesterday. Using the console access, you can now install virtual machine operating system into it. Okay, so these are the few things that I actually showed you yesterday during the lab demo part. Okay, during the lab demo part. Okay. So next thing will be the virtual machine snapshot. Okay, so I also show you how to actually do this. So yesterday I am using a, for example, a text file to actually simulate this feature. Do you remember that? Okay, text file. So I am creating the test snapshot. Okay, so some of you already see it. You still remember yesterday. I'm using the test snapshot.txt text file to demo the snapshot feature set. Okay, so over here, this is the theory part, what actually happened, okay, during our lab yesterday. So when you look into the diagram closely, your virtual machine original state, okay, this is basically one state of your, okay, we also call it the VHD. Okay, this is the original state, okay, your VHD. So when you create a snapshot, okay, generally it will be one point in time. For example, this one 8 p.m. For example, 8 p.m. you create a snapshot. So this one will be your what they call the delta disk. Delta disk. So when you create 8 p.m. snapshot, this guy will actually log state at 8 p.m. To read only. So the original disk will actually log to read only state 8 p.m. data. So it will protect data. So this particular disk will protect data before 8 p.m. state. So anything that is actually changed and added will be added in here. New data and also change data after 8 p.m. will be captured in this delta disk. It's also VHD. So all this will be stored in your virtual machine folder. Delta disk we call it. So this is how it works in your virtual machine snapshot technology, similar to VMware, also similar to Hyper-V. So this is the delta disk concept. So delta disk will capture your new and change data after 8 p.m. state. So that's why you will see that the read-write arrow, after you create a snapshot, it is pointing to this particular drive. So this is your delta disk. So when you have one snapshot over here, so later you can also create another snapshot, snapshot 2 for example. So snapshot 2 will generally log your data here into the other state. So over here you will see that maybe this guy here I created at 9 p.m. state. So the delta here will be captured data after 9 p.m. state. So the snapshot here, this one will actually capture 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. state, which is the earlier snapshot. And this one will also get logged, because this is the snapshot 1 delta. So when you create multiple snapshots, the disk will actually get locked as read-only. And your read-write will be redirected to the new delta disk for change and also new data. So this is the concept for your snapshot creation. Pretty easy, clear? So this is how you actually create your snapshot. This is how you actually create your snapshot. So once you have a snapshot, your earlier disk will get logged into a read-only state. So when you have multiple snapshots like this, your original disk will get locked. The data before 8 p.m. will get protected. The second one will also get locked when you create the other one. So this one will only protect data from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. state. Then you have the new one that will basically do changes and new data after 9 p.m. That's why you see that the data that you actually change over here will be affecting the delta disk here. So your snapshot will actually be locked, and you can always restore the state to either one of the snapshot. So this is the concept. So let's look into your restoring part. So over here you have two snapshots. So you already know that this is the original state. This is the first snapshot, time frame, point in time, and you have the second snapshot. So now your virtual machine is running like a two snapshot concept, with two different point in time. Two different point in time. So over here, let me just write down for your easy understanding here. Maybe I trigger here snapshot 1, 8 p.m. again, similar example. So this guy will be after 9 p.m. data. So this guy will be 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. data. So this is the original one will be data before 8 p.m. Okay, so these are the states. Okay, for this understanding. So these are the three states. So now, when I try to utilize the particular snapshot, so you see here, I try to delete the first one, okay, which is the 8 p.m. state. So which particular delta disk will be affected? So if I delete 8 p.m. state, the delta disk affected will be the data happen between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. Okay, so this is the point in time data will be affected. So when you choose to delete the snapshot, meaning to say, oh, the 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. data, I would like to be permanent, pump into the delta disk. Okay, permanently pump into the delta disk. So when you create, actually select delete. So initially they will clear off the snapshot and try to, you will see here, this particular delta, they will try to merge into the original VHD, okay, into the original VHD. So when you actually perform a merge here, okay, this is what they call merge or sometimes consolidation of your snapshot. Okay, so that your changes will get permanent. So your original here will be data, okay, before 9 p.m. after you do a snapshot consolidation. Okay, so you are moving the point in time from earlier before 8 p.m. now move to before 9 p.m. because you clear the snapshot in between the point in time. Okay, so you will see that generally your original disk will serve as a read-only for data up to 9 p.m. state, and your data change and new data that comes in after 9 p.m. will still be captured by the delta disk. Okay, so this is what we call snapshot deletion. So when you delete a snapshot, you are basically applying the changes for that delta into your original VHD. So when you're doing a delete, you cannot actually roll back up. Please remember that. So if you have no idea what you're doing, just double check what is the status here. Okay, so like I mentioned, so you are doing a merging, consolidating the changes to your original VHD. So you are bringing the point in time up to before 9 p.m. Okay, so this is what we call virtual machine snapshot deletion. So it is also reflecting what we call merging the data or consolidation of your snapshot. Okay, so this is the delete snapshot operation. Okay, so next thing we have another, what we call the restoring part. Okay, so we'll see that over here we have 8 p.m. still, then 9 p.m. we create a snapshot. So this one after 9 p.m. So this one will be 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. state. Okay, so this one will be before 8 p.m. So what we'll do here when we do a resume or restore, okay, that I showed yesterday, I would like to discard, okay, discard the changes because maybe you have some application corruption, for example. So now I would like to do a restore. Okay, so I will be resuming the virtual machine to the 8 p.m. snapshot so that I am rolling back my status, whereby the data is actually having some changes after 9 p.m. to roll back to data that is used between 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. state. So I am doing actually a restoration to, okay, what we call the before 9 p.m. state. Okay, so discard the changes here, as you can see. Okay, to discard the changes here. So this is pretty useful, especially when you're planning to do some operating system or application upgrade. You can utilize a snapshot to protect your data temporarily. Okay, people can do that. So anything happens after you do some upgrade, you can always roll back to a different point in time of your data set. Now, all this delta will actually eat up more space in your data store. So it is not wise to actually open best practices for virtual machine snapshot, not to keep more than 24 hours snapshot time, okay? Or maximum keep snapshot up to 72 hours only, okay? Because when your snapshot size is too huge, consolidation will have performance issue okay, on the data store. Okay, so they will affect your data store capacity, one thing, and also your data store performance when you are merging the data. Okay, so these two will generally looking into the capacity sizing of your delta disk, because your new and change data will happen to that delta. And later when you plan to delete the snapshot, you are basically doing merging. So when you merge, if the snapshot delta disk is too huge, it will be very long in time consumption, and they will also slow down your data store performance. So over here, you will actually slow down your production VM that's running in the same data store. So this is the best practices for VM snapshots that happens in VMware, also Hyper-V, okay? Including we are doing here, Fusion Compute. Okay, so this is on the snapshot part. Okay, this is what we call the snapshot restoration. Okay, so I will stop for a short break here before we continue. Okay, before we continue. So it's already 9:25. Let me stop for a short break. Okay. 15 minutes break. See you guys later after 15 minutes. Then we'll continue the PPT. So you can drop your question in a group while I'm away. Okay, thank you. And please, if the late joiners, please complete the account creation in our LMS website, okay, when you're free now, so that we can utilize it for the post-test short quiz. Okay.
Hello.
NUMA. That's why in a lot of environment, the NUMA function is not enabled by default. Okay. So if you have a special OS or application needs, then you need to create a separate cluster. So if you go for enterprise environment, okay, first you need to have one NUMA cluster for special application. Then second one, a general cluster for other virtual machine use. So some environment will have two clusters separately. One is the NUMA cluster to support special application that can actually utilize this feature. If you have other virtual machine, then we will need to create another cluster. So the NUMA cluster, maybe they'll put in a few CNA nodes. Then the general cluster, they will put in all other remaining nodes, okay, for NUMA functionality. So NUMA generally is to share the CPU and RAM memory architecture between two different hosts. So you need to look for the processor that can actually support this particular feature, okay, called NUMA. This one is actually full name called non-uniform memory access. Yeah, you can actually Google. Okay, it's a standard tag that already in the market for like past 10 years, but not many people utilizing it due to the limitation. Okay. So lastly, we'll look into some of the features provided by Huawei Vision Compute Virtualization. Okay. So prerequisite to enable advanced feature that we discussed earlier, okay, is the tools. Still remember yesterday I demoed the installation. After the operating system installation has been done, the next thing you need to mount your VM2 and install the VM2 software. So the VM2 will act as an agent software for the VRM to manage your virtual machine operating system layer. And they will also provide a lot of extra features like snapshot function, live migration, all these things, okay, that we actually do it yesterday. So if you want to provide a NIC card QS, you will require the tools to do that. And I also show you from the virtual machine, there will be some missing driver, especially your network card. So the VM2 will actually help you to install the virtual machine hardware driver in order to be fully functional. Okay. And then from the virtual machine 2, act as an agent, I will get the hardware information and also the status information, like whether it is actually having some problem or not on the virtual machine. Okay. So you will see that the VM2, they will provide you a virtual machine hardware driver, okay. VM advanced feature. Okay, then they will also provide you the resource usage information that I showed yesterday. After you install the VM2, you will be able to see all this information. Okay. Driver, agents, and they will also able to perform graceful OS shutdown and also restart. Okay, that I actually showed you yesterday. And the VM2 will detect virtual machine OS status, okay, such as Windows BOSD, okay, BSOD, okay, blue screens of death. This is the full name for BSOD. Okay, so this is one of the options. Now with the VM2, okay, your VRM can actually know that, oh, this virtual machine OS is now having a blue screen, basically hang. Okay, so they can detect this status to facilitate a later feature that we'll also discuss, okay, in the later slide. And also your particular Linux, they call it the 10 screens of death. So all this might also ask in your exam, so you need to be very careful on all these short form, 10 screen of death. So basically, the VRM will actually know your Windows and Linux virtual machine status. Okay. So you see that the user mode, VM agent, they can obtain the MAC address, status, all these things. Your graceful shutdown and restart of your virtual machine. Okay, so it's all according to the VM2. Okay, they need to actually install manually. Okay, remember that. So without the VM2, you can't do a lot of the extra feature that we discussed just now. Okay, so this is the VM2. Now the VM2 is pretty similar to VMware. Okay, you also need the VM2 to actually do all this feature. In Microsoft Hyper-V, it is called the Client Integration Service. Okay, integration service. So this is the similar concept, just different name for software. Okay, and we will also look into some of the Huawei virtualization cluster feature. Okay, so most of the things that we discussed earlier is more general. So what are the things that actually provided by Huawei themselves. So we'll see here has a virtual cluster for your CNA node. Okay, later I will show you from the management cluster perspective. What is the feature that offers here? So first thing, they will basically provide memory over commitment as a feature that you can enable if you want to. Okay, so best recommend to enable this to improve your overall RAM memory utilization. Then you have your NUMA functionality. Okay, that is also optional. And in the cluster, I can enable HA feature called the high availability. So start off today, we actually discuss about the concept. So later we will see what is the scenario actually will run the virtual machine HA feature set. So similar that we discussed, load balancing. In Huawei virtual cluster, we have the load balancing feature to load balance your workload on the CNA and also provide some extra power management feature. Okay, and another thing will be IMC that we'll also discuss more in depth here. So let's move on for HA. Okay, so the HA is actually called the virtual machine high availability feature. So over here, you will have a few scenario. Okay, let me just write it down here. Okay. So now you have a few places here. This is actually your data store failure. This is actually your virtual machine OS failure, or you can also call it the blue screens of death or pink screens of death, for example. Okay. And this one maybe CNA failure. Okay, CNA failure. So you have a few different failure scenario. Okay, so these are the few options that you can actually configure. For example, if you have a data store failure that actually store your virtual machine data, so one option will be do nothing. Okay, your virtual machine status will be unknown. Okay, earlier it's online, now it's actually unknown offline because it will be a failure now. Cannot detect the VM anymore. Or you can do virtual machine HA. Okay, so we'll go for virtual machine HA. Here, this one you can actually restart VM when data store online. Okay, this is one of the options. Okay, so do you actually do nothing to it, or actually ask the VRM to instruct the VM to restart once the data store is connected or online? Okay, so this is pretty tricky for high critical server. Okay, most of the time we don't do anything on it, because if your data store is not stable, whereby they might be on for 5 minutes, later drop again for maybe another 5 minutes and come back and forth, your virtual machine will be hairwired, whereby they will keep on restarting, and it might actually break your operating system and your application data, and the VM actually down from the operating system layer. So in some environment, the administrator will prefer not to do anything first before they actually solve and rectify the data store failure. Okay? So they will make sure the data store is consistent now, stable state, before they will actually repower on the VM, just to avoid any VM level issue happens. So data store failure, you can't do much things from VRM level because it's a storage issue. So most of the time, we don't really focus on this part. Okay, it will be by default do nothing. Okay, so you will see here, this is actually the default option. So if you want them to actually help you to automatically restart, then you change, for example. Okay? So if you actually do CNA failure issue, so this is one of the options. So I will basically do restart. Okay. VM when CNA online, okay, for example. So the first option will be restore on the original host. Okay. So if you go for the VM history, I can also check to restart VM on another CNA. Okay. So this one will minimize downtime that we discussed earlier. Okay. So if you go for VM history, select restart VM on another CNA host. Soon as the CNA node is actually down, okay, CNA failure, the virtual machine will be temporarily offline due to the CNA issue. Then, because you configure a virtual machine HA to be run, so VRM will restart the VM on another CNA node and proceed to run the virtual machine. So your downtime on the VM will able to minimize. Okay? So soon when the virtual machine boot up completely, services will able to actually continue. Okay. So another thing will be virtual machine OS failure, where you have Windows blue screen or Linux pink screen, the entire OS now hang. So what do you want to do? Okay. So here will be restart VM on same CNA host. Okay. So you can try to restart on the same CNA host if it is not a hardware issue, for example. Okay. Or you can also here define to restart on another CNA host. Okay. So these are the few options that you can do. Or can also do nothing. Okay. Although the VRM knows that, oh, your virtual machine is now in blue screen, I will not do anything because you told me to do so. Then the administrator need to manually manage your VM, maybe to check on the message beforehand and do a restart manually. Things like this. So these are the few options that you can actually configure to minimize your virtual machine downtime. Okay. What we call the HA, high availability. So this feature is similar, offered in VMware also. So VMware can also provide virtual machine HA, okay, that Huawei now is doing here. Okay, so next thing will be the power management. Okay, power management. So for power management, there's a few names here. Okay, so for CNA, power management. Sometimes you will also see a name called DPM in your documentation. Okay, DPM in your documentation. This is what we call the dynamic power management. Okay, dynamic power management. So the older version CNA, they call it DPM, dynamic power management. So in your documentation material or even your exam question, they might still use dynamic power management wording, DPM. So when you see DPM, it's basically referring to this scenario, okay, DPM. So they can do certain power management on the CNA node, okay. So they are able to shut down or hibernate CNA node. Okay. They can also do power on CNA server. Okay. CNA server. Require BMC login on the CNA in VRM configuration. So still remember when you add in the CNA node, there will be a BMC options asking you, okay, what is the login, okay, for IP and password username for the BMC baseband management, so that your VRM can actually tell CNA server to power up themselves, okay, to facilitate this scenario. Okay. So to utilize the power management, they can help you to shut down and hibernate the CNA node from the CNA software layer. And later, when you want to power them up again, they require certain BMC access. Okay, so you need to provide the BMC login to the VRM for this CNA. So Huawei will call it IBMC. Dell will be iDRAC, HP iLow, Lenovo will be IMM. Okay, so they come with different names. So you need to look into your own server hardware. Do you have the baseband function to do remote power on or not? Things like this. Okay, so the scenario will be looking something like this. Okay, so when you have an extra power management feature, so you can set a schedule, for example, 11 p.m. daily. What will happen when they actually hit the 11 p.m. schedule? The virtual machine load at night will be very low normally. So now it is best to consolidate your virtual machine into lower numbers of CNA nodes so that your power consumption can be lowered. So when this time comes, if the load is low enough, they will try to live migrate the virtual machine to lesser numbers of nodes. So we are doing live migration here, okay? So your virtual machine will not be going down, please remember that. Okay, so it will be doing live VM migration. So this one will require a shared storage, okay, shared data store configuration. If not, you cannot provide this feature. Okay, so when the schedule kicks in, 11 p.m., virtual machine will start to move. And over here, we can instruct the CNA host to actually hibernate. Okay, so you will see the power here, color, hibernate. So with this particular schedule, okay, the node will be hibernate. It will not use any power, electricity, all these things. So with this schedule for certain data center at night, they can power down maybe up to like 50 or 100 physical CNA server to reduce their overall power consumption, electricity bill, so that they can pay lesser electricity bill. So with this software mechanism in place, they will help you to schedule it in time. And later, when the production hour almost comes in, okay, 7 a.m., you can trigger the schedule to power on the CNA again, and then migrate the virtual machine to this host again, okay, so that you can now provide more resources to the virtual machine that does not slow down in production hour. Okay, so this is your power management to actually schedule the hibernation and power on off of your CNA node, okay, in your VRM. Okay, so this is the feature set for power management. So over here you see another one will be DRS. Okay. So remember, okay, you need to have a fusion compute DRS. Okay. So your DRS stands for dynamic resource scheduling. Okay. Or sometimes they also call it the distributed resource scheduling. Okay, so these are the name. So for DRS can be enabled itself, okay, standalone. So now if you go for fusion compute power management that we discussed just now, okay, so the power management will require DRS to enable before power management. Okay, so this one will be a package. Okay, so in order to utilize this feature, it will be DRS plus power management. Okay, so your DRS can enable alone. no issue. So from the Fusion Compute environment, I can choose to utilize DRS only without DPM. But if you plan to utilize the power management, you need to enable DRS first, because DRS is the one that can help you to automatically load balance the node, things like this, okay, with the feature set. So when you're moving your nodes around, they require DRS to help out. Okay, DPM is just mainly to manage the power on-off schedule. This is the package. Okay, so please remember that. Later I will show you where you can actually look for this option in your lab itself. So the DRS rules you can configure, for example, okay, there are a few options here. So when I enable DRS, your virtual machine will have a load balancing function to move your VM around to achieve utilization load balancing. You can define some extra rules to, for example, keep virtual machine together. So I can create a rule saying that, oh, virtual machine 1 and 2 should run on the same host. Okay? Because they might be doing some internal communication, you would like them to happen within the same CNA host. Then you can do something like this. Okay? So with this feature, your virtual machine, when they will move in a group. So when VM1 move to CNA1, for example, VM2 will also follow, okay, to move in a group, because you ask them to keep the VM to run together. Okay. So next thing will be keep VM apart. Okay, keep VM apart, or in your Fusion Compute, they call it mutually exclusive. Okay, mutually exclusive. Just to tell the system, VM1 and 2 should run on a different CNA, okay, at any time. So the DRS rules will make sure VM1 on CNA2, VM2 on CNA1, for example. And then when they move, if, for example, VM1 would like to do live migration, okay, manually to CNA1, then the DRS will kick in and help you to move VM2 to CNA2. Okay, so this is just the scenario where it will get applied. So they'll make sure it will not stay in the same CNA node. This is to facilitate hardware redundancy. You know that this VM1 and 2 is basically one application cluster. With this feature, if one CNA host is down, okay, there goes with the virtual machine also. The VM2 is also part of the application cluster. They can still provide services without any downtime. Okay, so this is to facilitate hardware level redundancy protection if the CNA host for any reason actually goes down. So this is to actually works on top of HA function to reduce your service downtime. Okay, service downtime. So with this scenario, your virtual machine services will not actually go down because they have a 1+1 cluster function. Okay, so virtual machine to host, there's another options here. Okay, you can also call it here. Okay, here or bind to host. So if you define bind to host function, what they'll do here is VM1 and 2 will always, one here, okay, run on CNA1 only. Okay. So this is another configuration. You do not want the virtual machine to move around to other CNA hosts. You can define an extra rule here. Tell the system, oh, this virtual machine only run on CNA1, for example. So in your virtual machine, there is a bind to host function, okay, just to control this particular virtual machine to run on this host. Okay, so this is the DRS rules. Okay. So next thing will be the IMC. So this one might be asked in the exam also. Okay, full name for IMC is actually incompatible migration cluster. Okay, migration cluster. So in the Fusion Compute, we can support to migrate your virtual machine between CNA hosts, okay, if they are running on the same generation CPU model. If you have mixtures of CPU from different generation, okay, because they will have different feature and performance line, you need to enable IMC feature. Okay, IMC feature. So the IMC will help to facilitate live migration on the VM from one generation of CPU to another generation of CPU. And we do support Intel-based CPU, okay, for IMC functionality. So over here, let's look into the diagram, for example. Okay, so let me just throw it out a bit here. So you have CNA 1, then CNA 2. So this guy running maybe i7 10 gen CPU. This guy also i7 10 gen CPU. Now, in order for you to provide the virtual machine, okay, live migration. Now, if you are running on this environment, okay, do not enable IMC. Okay. If you enable IMC, you will get error if enable, because from your VRM cluster, they detect that there are no difference in CPU model or generation. They will actually tell you an error message. IMC is enabled for whatever reason. I cannot do live migration. Okay, so this is a limitation. So if you're not using different model or generations of CPU, do not utilize or enable IMC from the virtual cluster. Okay, so if you would like to facilitate the live migration functionality for different CPU, for example, you have the CNA1 10 gen CPU, i7, for example. Oh, CNA2 may be running on a i7, maybe 5th gen. Okay. So now this one is too big a part of the difference. I need to, okay, enable IMC, okay, to actually downgrade the 10 gen to 5th gen. Okay, to do this, we are basically doing what? Disable, okay, additional feature, and also performance. This is to backward compatible with the 5th generation CPU. So after you enable IMC, the virtual machine is running like a 5th gen CPU. So you have no problem to do live migration. Okay, so this is what the IMC is all about. It's basically downgrading all your CPU to the lowest model that actually occur in your virtual cluster. Okay, so if you have like mixtures of 2 or 3 different model or generations of CPU, they will go for the lowest one. So you need to know which different types of CPU that you add in. Then you need to choose in the IMC function which generation would you like to downgrade to. Okay, later I will show from the lab environment. So this is initial the scenario. If you have different types of CPU, you should enable the IMC if you want to provide live migration function. If your CNN is using the same processor, model, and generation, do not enable IMC. Okay, if not, they will give you error when you try to do live migration. You need to disable them. So to enable IMC and disable IMC, you can do it online without any issue, actually. So it's quite flexible for you to change this option. You just need to know where is it. Okay, so we will actually discuss that later in the lab environment. Okay, so here, lastly will be some of the virtual machine feature. Okay. So we'll see fast deployment. We already covered that in the lab yesterday as demo. I show you how to deploy virtual machine using the template and also doing VM cloning one-to-one. Okay, identical virtual machine copy. And the resource management, I roughly show you where is it for you to configure. Okay, later I'll show that also. PNC login, snapshot, and other peripheral. So I also show you how to mount the CD-ROM drive for the installation part. Okay, so if you are going for the CPU and RAM memory resource usage control, you can define different types of configuration like quota, reserve, and limit. That yesterday I actually show some of the information. So you can reserve minimum CPU resources for the virtual machine to have from the CNA node. And you can also limit what is the maximum that they can use. Reserve, if you don't use it or not, it will be there forever for your virtual machine. Okay, it will not be shared by other virtual machine. Okay, that's running on the same CNA host. Okay, so that's about it for the theory topic. Okay, so let me just move into the last part of your lab demo. Okay, last part of the lab demo. So I will use the eLab resources from Huawei. So I heard from Maro, you guys actually get the eLab resources next week. Okay, so you can practice them and you can ask questions to Maro next week if you have anything about the lab itself. Okay, they will provide you a lab guide for you to access to this lab. So you need to log in with the account that provides to you. Okay, then click on Start Lab. Agree the license agreement. Okay. Then you will see there is a lab environment prepared for you, okay, using HCIA cloud computing. So click on this menu, okay, click on this menu. Then you will see there is a terminal machine here for you to access. So when you click on it, you can click on login. Okay. So this page comes in Chinese and English. So if you have Chinese issue, for example, you want to change your English, the button will be always on the top right corner. Okay, remember to change it to English before login. So when I click on login, they will bring you to the Huawei Fusion Access VDI portal. Okay, for you to log into your virtual machine. Okay, so this is the Fusion Access VDI portal website. So click on Advanced. Okay, just to add exception. Continue to accept the non-trusted certificate, no issue. So this is the Fusion Access Remote Virtual Desktop Infrastructure Portal. Okay, this is one of the Huawei solution. It will be covered in the HCIP training. Okay, for us, we don't really cover that here. So they will provide you the username and password for this remote terminal machine. Okay, so you will get it for next week. Okay, on all this login and user password for you to log into the machine itself. Okay, so I will actually now into the terminal. So remember here, when you minimize, you can see everything. When you maximize, okay, now you see that why my taskbar actually moved to the left, because when I maximize, your taskbar will be missing because it's blocked by this menu. So remember that. So normally I will minimize from here, there's a menu. Okay, your mouse doesn't move to the middle, there's a menu to minimize the window so that you can drag your start button to the left or right to see all these icons. Okay, so to maximize again, just click on this button. Okay, so I will go back to the VRM again, just to show you around some of the features that we discussed today. Okay, before we move into the post-test and evaluation form. Okay, so now this is the Fusion Compute VRM again. So when you go to the resource pools, okay, so under the resource pool, you will see that there is a management cluster here. So when I click on it, okay, so you will see all your management cluster configuration here as a summary. So you will see that in this scenario, virtual machine startup policy you can configure, load balancing, HA is enabled, memory over commitment is actually disabled, okay. IMC disabled, resource scheduling, the DRS is also disabled, NUMA is also disabled, okay, all these things. So you will see here, let me check my virtual machine usage, okay. So I'm having like 2 VM, all these things, okay, running. So when I click on the management cluster, so how can you actually configure the cluster options? So when you go up to the management cluster level, move your mouse to the control cluster resource, and click on it. Then they'll bring you to the virtual cluster configuration. Okay, so first thing, they will ask you, do you want to enable memory over commitment? So just click on it to enable the feature. So your startup policy, you can put in auto assign or load balancing. Okay, doesn't really matter much. So if you go for load balancing, they will utilize round robin concept. Okay, VM1, CNA1, VM2, CNA2, all these things to load balance the usage. If you go for auto assignment, it will be random. Okay, it will be random. So sometimes maybe you have like 5 VM running on one CNA, the other CNA is empty. So most of the time, default load balance should get the job done already. So you can also go for NUMA if you want to. I'm not really enabling that. So next thing will be configure HA. So HA is enabled on the virtual cluster level. So you have a few scenarios here. First will be host failure policy. This is a CNA 40 issue. Enable. Then what is the option do you want to go for? Restore VM on original host or HA to a different host, for example. Okay. And your data store fault will be here. If your data store is disconnected for any reason, what to do? No action will be default, or you can also do HA. Once the data store is up, they will automatically restore, things like this. Okay, so when you move down, you have the virtual machine 40 policy. If they detect VM issue, so what you need to do, restart the VM on the same host or HA to another host itself. Okay. You can also check access control policy to configure your reservation resources for other CNA hosts to actually host your VM. So when you put in here, for example, okay, when you put in here, so I will reserve, okay, resources for HA. So initially they will basically CNA1, okay, reserve maybe 30% for VM migrate. Okay, so CNA2 similar, reserve 30% resources for virtual machine migration. So this is to facilitate later when CNA1 is down, the virtual machine can migrate to CNA2, and CNA2 will make sure there will be some minimum resources available to run the virtual machine that is hosted earlier from CNA1. So this is one of the options, or we can also dedicate which host will be used for your failover, all these things, okay? So this is the few options for access control policy. Then you can also do some cluster port control. So how many numbers of hosts that allow VM HA, or things you can control it, things like this. Also advanced settings that you can add in some extra detection for time that you can customize it. So all this, you leave it by default, it should get the job done already. So another one will be your resource scheduling. So we'll click on configure resource scheduling. you can enable that. Okay? Then your virtual machine will be roaming around based on your configuration here. So you will see that for your DRS, resource scheduling, first, automation level, do you want to do manual migration or automatic migration? So if you go for manual, okay, when the VRM detects that a certain virtual machine should migrate to load balance it out, they will just prompt you a suggestion message. Okay. So most of our time, we'll just put into automatic. So let VRM help you to decide and move the VM straight away when they think that it is a need to. So I will measure by the CNA CPU usage in percentage or memory or both. Okay, or both. Then you can see over here, enable migration when the maximum whole CPU utilization exceeds certain threshold. You can set here to be more precise control so that you can even out the load on the whole CPU and memory for all the CNA nodes. Okay. And then when is the time to actually migrate it? Okay, based on your urgency of your time. Okay, urgency of your time. So you can check this DRS by day basis. So every day they will check the load, okay, or by week or by month, all these things. Okay, so this is one of the options. So when you scroll down further, like I mentioned, you need to enable DRS first. When you scroll down further, then only you will see the power management, or they sometimes call the DPM. So after you enable resources with the DRS, then you can go for power management. So you will see that we require BMC configuration on the host before you enable this feature. If not, you will have an issue whereby VRM will help you to hibernate or power down the CNA node, but later when they require it to run, they cannot remove power on the machine from the VRM. So you need to make sure the BMC configuration is in the host already with the correct username and password. Then you can enable the automatic power management to actually check by day when is the time for you to actually run this as a schedule. Okay. So I will not run this DPM for now. And lastly will be the IMC feature. Okay. So when you go for configure IMC, you can enable IMC function. So you see that over here, IMC mode, you can downgrade to different types of CPU generation based on the platform that they use. Okay? So if you're into CPU, you know that nowadays we have Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, okay, and the latest one is using Lake as the name. So I think the latest one is called Coffee Lake or something like that. Okay? So you can change the chipset or the platform here, as you can see. If you go for Nehalem will can support Xeon, okay, Core i7, and all this. So if you have higher generation processor, if you go for Nehalem, your CNA node, one of them will be running on this particular generation model. Okay. So if you go for higher options like Haswell, for example, then they will support minimum Haswell platform. If you have CPU lower than Haswell generation, you cannot utilize that node for hot migration or light migration. Okay. So if you go for the highest one like Skylake, they can only support this generation CPU. Okay. So when you add in extra CNA node that can support any generation higher than this particular platform, then they will also downgrade to Skylake. Okay, Skylake. So if you are not mixing any generation types of CPU, you can disable this always. Okay? If you are mixing, only you enable that. So this is the options that you can actually do in your virtual cluster. Okay? So when I confirm, they will actually apply all this. So you see that now memory overcommit will be enabled. Okay? Then you see that from your resource scheduling is also enabled now. Okay? Things like this. So this is on the virtual cluster level. So when you go to the virtual machine, Okay, so you can see the NUMA adjustment here can be enabled if you have a NUMA cluster for the option part. So you can also enable hot function and also bind your host to the virtual machine. So when I bind this, I am telling the VRM this VM should run on which particular host only, okay, as an option. So all this will be able to set in the virtual machine configuration level of these things. Okay, so this is some of the extra options that you can do over here. Okay, so some other things like monitoring, you can check the alarms here, okay, on what is happening in your VRM environment. Okay, on monitoring and also event. You can also check your performance. Okay, so to certain KPI, I can check on single object, multiple KPI. For example, I would like to go for host level. Which object do I want to check? For example, CNA1. Okay, well, I would like to check CNA1 figure for CPU usage. Okay, and also this read usage from what time to what time. Okay, so let me check on the date. Okay, so April, we start off around Wednesday. Okay, then I will go for the end date. So you need to put in a range of date. You can check the figure. Okay, April, then 16, for example. Okay, then I will search, and they will give you a usage trend based on one CNA, CPU, and also this read health. So if you go for a single KPI with multiple objects, I can now check for maybe CPU usage. I would like to do a comparison between two CNA hosts. Okay. You can also check on VM level if you want to. So generation time, similar. Okay, so you can do something like this, 20, 20, for example, and 04. 15. Okay, and shortcut here 2020.04.16. Okay, and OK as a shortcut. It'll be faster with that mouse click. Then you can compare the usage for your CNA 1 and 2. So it's all under monitoring under the performance KPI part. Okay, so these are the extra things that you can do with the VRM. Then when you go to the system tab, okay, you can check on the task log. I show you a few times already what is happening in your VRM. After you submit a task, you can always check the schedule here, okay, on your work itself. Operation log will basically capture anything changes to your particular configuration like cluster configuration, login using VMC to the VM. Okay, they even show you, for example, like stop, start VM, all these important operations. And they will also put it to dangerous or critical under particular task. Okay. So when you go for right management, you can actually create multiple user accounts, okay, for your access to the VRM. You can even change your password policy. Okay, like how long do you want your password to be, complexity, okay, and also your expiration date for your password, all these things. Okay. So generally, these are the few things that you can do. Also system configuration like license management that we see from the simulator website, all this. Okay, so generally that will be the demo for today. Okay, so it's almost end of time. So if you have any question, you can always post to the group, and I will need you guys to help me to do these things. Okay, so after you create the account in the RMS website, I will bring you to the website now to help me to complete the post-training short test. So access to the Google Sheet that I have for you guys, okay, with this tiny link, so that you can click on the post-test link and the Google form link that I provide to you. Okay, go into the Google Sheet short link now. So after you've done these things, I will share with you where you can access to the sample questions. Okay, so go to the Google Sheet. Okay, so under Google Sheet, so scroll down to the bottom. You have the HCIA Cloud Computing post test. Okay, post test. So click on this link. Okay, click on the post test link. It will bring you to the LMS website from my company. Log in with your account. Okay, in LMS website with the link, shortcut link to the post test question. Okay, so the enrollment key will be 04/2020M. Okay, so log into the post test question. Okay, post test question. So you will come to the HCIA Cloud Computing post test. Okay, Cloud Computing post test over here for Mozambique. So you need to put in the enrollment key. So the enrollment key is actually 04/2020M capital letter. 04/2020M capital letter. Click enroll me. Okay, click enroll me. To access to the post test question. So you will see this is the test created for this week. Click on the HCIA Cloud Computing 13 to 17 April 2020. Then you can click on attempt quiz now. I will give you guys 50 minutes to complete this short test. It's a 10-question test. Okay. So this 10 question is actually the mock test from Huawei. I will need you guys to complete this test. After you've done this, click on finish attempt. Then you will get your score and record. Okay. So we will record this down from our website. See who actually did the post test already, and also the evaluation form that I posted in the Google Sheet. So after you have done the post test, our Google Sheet evaluation form, and also Huawei evaluation form, that will show where you can access to the sample question. So our website administrator will, based on your name and email, to tally the record to allow you to access to the sample question for study. Okay. So now help me to do this post test, 10 question, 15 minutes, should be more than enough. Okay. After that, then you can access to the Google Sheet. Okay, let me just bring back my Google Sheets. Yeah, your Google Sheet. So under the Google Sheet, there is the things here called the training evaluation form. So when you click on it, you need to help me to complete this form for this training, okay, eval form for our company use. So we'll have all your information to tally this and the post test to allow you to access to this sample question. So all the link is available in the Google form, sorry, Google Sheet that I show you from the short link. So remember to complete the short test now, and also the evaluation form. Okay, so this is an enrollment key for the short test. Yeah. Okay, then you can access to the short test. So I give you guys 15 minutes. Later, I will show where you can access to the sample question. So I need you guys favor to help me to complete all the things before I show you around on the question set. I will post this key to the WhatsApp group also, okay, for easy access here. And also the Google form for the eval. Okay, so this is for InfoSight eval form. So if you guys do not have the Huawei email for the Huawei eval form, you can also access it here. Okay. So another one will be the post test. Okay, it's all in the WhatsApp group for you to access it easily also if you're using a computer for WhatsApp.
Hello, Daniel.
Yes.
Yeah, sincere apologies. I'm having some technical challenges here. So I was actually thrown out of the meeting. I'm trying to do the enrollment.
Okay.
Yeah, now I think it is telling me that your application has been sent. I don't know what that's supposed to.
Wait. Okay. Hey, did you come to this part? Do you see this just now? The enrollment part. So you should access the HCIA Cloud Converting Mozambique. Okay, this is designed for this class.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think you access the other one maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so this one is the one with the enrollment key that I showed you just now. Okay, so with this enrollment key is for this short test. Okay, so it's a 10-question test. It should be completed quite fast. Okay, so I will show you where to access the actual study question set.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, yes.
I've created my email, but showing me that I need to confirm.
Yes. Did you verify your account already? Jet. You are Michael Bello, right? Just
Yes.
a moment. Check your account. Okay, there's a lot of you. Okay. Nope, I didn't get your entry here. Nope, I still did not get your account. Maybe you can recreate it or something. Oh. So Michael, I think you can recreate the account again. If you have any problems still, you can screenshot and send me an email. And also you can complete your post test later. Okay? But remember to complete it before you can access to the question set. Okay, it's
but,
almost, yeah, yes.
Unfortunately, I'm still having a problem because I can't see that that class with Mozambique in it.
Wait, I think the link is in the WhatsApp group. Are you in the WhatsApp group?
Yes, I am.
Yes, so there's a shortcut messaging when you actually put in here. Will bring you to the correct course.
Is that so?
And then over here, when you put in 042020, then you can enroll me. After you click enroll me, what is the message do you got?
Oh, post tests. Okay.
Yes, under post test, yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm checking.
Yep. There's a lot of course here. That's why I give you the shortcut easily. It's okay, you can complete it later because we need that as a record for you to access to the question set. So now another few more minutes. Okay, let me show you where you can access the question after you've done all the things that we asked you to. So after you log into the LMS system, do you see a category called cloud computing? So we'll click on cloud computing, okay, under Huawei, cloud computing. There's a HCIA cloud computing here. Click on it. Then you need to enroll yourself to the question set, similar here, but you need to put in my name. Okay, for 5 days already, I think you guys know my name, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Daniel or Daniel Fu. Okay, and then your course start date. When did you start the course? April 2020. Okay, so you put in this information in the comment link. When you click enroll me, the web page administrator will check your records because we have all your names and email. See whether you complete the post test or not, you completed the eval form or not. If you do that, they will allow you to access. So after you click enroll me, you just need to wait for maybe 1 or 2 days. Then you come back here, you should be able to access the question. Okay, so after you can access the question, it will be something similar like what you did just now in the post test. It's basically the same system with more question here for you to study. Okay, so the post test already got 10. Here you got some other question. Now do remember, this might not be 100% the same question. They are just here to help you to prepare for exam. They will maybe give you some hint what are the things that they will focus and the way they ask question in the exam. Okay, please remember that. Because for Huawei exam, a lot of time we still have some issue is the language barrier. Because a lot of time their question actually converted from Chinese to English. So some of the question, the grammar might be a bit off. So it's best to have some sample questions for you to read through and see what will be expected in the exam. Okay, get the idea here for you guys. Okay, so my email address, you guys do have it. If you have any other question that you need some help, you can always email to me. If I am available, I will try to reply you guys ASAP. Okay, or you can post a question in the group also. There will be some other people like Meryl and also Xinjiang will help you guys. Okay. So it's already 11 my time. Okay, the training is considered concluded now. So I thank you guys to join the training. Okay. So hope you guys enjoy the theory and the lab demo part. Okay. So good luck for your exam preparation. So if you need any help, you can always post your group or email to me. Okay. So remember, before you can access to the questions,